Mitchellville was a thriving, self-governed community of freed, formerly enslaved people. So, and it was the first in America, which a lot of people don't know. And so right here, like it'll tell you about self-run town.
So we are the foundation of this island. So you cannot just view the commodities that we have to offer. You have to look at the development, what it took for us to get to this point. And we have to appreciate that, and we have to acknowledge our past, our history.
I didn't really know what Mitchellville was or that it existed until I was probably in my late 20s, early 30s, and I'm 45 now. So
And you grew up here?
And I grew up here. I went to a church that was an original part of Mitchellville, and I never heard about Mitchellville. Why did we never talk about Mitchellville?
I don't recall a day growing up on Hilton Head that any families in any of these communities did not have adequate food and adequate clothing.
And that's what you point to as the legacy of Mitchellville. Mitchellville, that's where people got their start. That's where his family got started. And that's where families who are now living free lives on Hilton Head and elsewhere got motivated to do so at Mitchellville. After slavery, they got a little taste of freedom, and they went on and became free. You got educators, you got lawyers, doctors, because of Mitchellville.
General Mitchell, who was a Union general, the Union had won. They had contraband, which were the slaves, and they had to figure out what to do with the contraband. So General Mitchell designated the 300 acres, which would later be called Mitchellville, to these formerly enslaved people so that they could make a living and have a place of their own. There are all types of roads that led from Mitchellville.
Right. And did some of the formerly enslaved folks that lived and worked here, were they able to earn money working here to then buy property right outside of Mitchellville after?
Yes, they were, because some were actually working for the Union Army.
Right.
And so they got wages from there, or, some grew crops and sold the things from their crops. So one of my oldest family members living now said that, a lot of times people didn't talk about it because they, I guess they just put it with slavery in their mind. But really, it's like a story of freedom. It's not a story of slavery, because these are formerly enslaved people that, they went from being owned to owning land and property themselves. So that's huge, but I think that people back then they didn't want to talk about it.
We all have to realize that Mitchellville's being comes from a very dark place in our history. I mean, if it was not for slavery, we would not have a need for Mitchellville. And that's a very uncomfortable conversation, right? And I think that's a challenge, okay? Because in a lot of ways, folks want to sort of shut that part down and not talk about it, okay? And I think we have to be bold enough as a community, as a whole, to have that conversation, okay? That's number one.
And you could read things about, the Port Royal experiment,
right,
which it was an experiment to see whether, these formerly enslaved people could really live on their own and do things on their own and not need help. I mean, it's sad, but if Mitchellville didn't work, if it didn't thrive, I often think, where would we have been? Like, where would my ancestors be? Where would
Right.
we as African Americans be today?
Well, this has been really great to hear your perspective on Mitchellville and hear all the history. Thank you, Lola.
Thank you so much for coming.